Hello, my name is Nancy Ibakiban, and I would like to talk to you today about my experience while I was studying for my PhD degree. I have a PhD degree from Arizona University, and my area of study was biliteracy and reading. People wonder what biliteracy means, and they get stuck with the idea that it's just two languages, ASL and English. And yes, that was my core study. But is it limited to just English and ASL? No, it includes all variety of other languages, Spanish, French, whatever it may be. But the point of my study was to focus on how people learn two languages at the same time. How do they do that? And we had big discussions during my graduate program. And everyone had different perspectives. But what I learned the most important is for young children and parents and how they go back and forth between their two languages, English and ASL. And it could be other languages as well. Motherese is one of the ideas that we discussed. It's a powerful language. It's the bond between a mother and her child. They have their own communication, their own language, their own bond. The same with other languages. Motherese can apply to that as well. Spanish, French, whatever it may be. Whatever you may think of. So I want to take a step back here and talk about what bilingual means for deaf children. And what it means to have access to both English and ASL. And does English mean only reading and writing? No. It also includes, along with reading and writing, is the spoken language and listening. It's all of those elements. And must a student do all of them? Must they be skilled in all of them to be able to learn? No. The point is to learn English, to learn how to read and to write, and that's important. And to have an equal respect and equal opportunity for both languages. And we introduce that concept in school worldwide. Some people introduce it now with SimCom. And SimCom is a mode of communication. It's not bilingual. It's very fragmented. It's a very messy language. And it's easy to get lost for these children, to get confused. And for someone who thinks they're really skilled, I would love to meet them because I have yet to meet someone that is skilled in SimCom. They tend to drop their second language and focus on the first language because that's where the mental process is, that's where the connection is. And the grammar structure for ASL and English is not the same. For example, ASL tends to start with time placement, and time concept first, and then expansion. In English, time can be anywhere. It's not first. So again, we have to emphasize the most important thing is we have to emphasize that English is a very complex language, and to learn both at the same time is a fascinating and interesting challenge for all children and family members as well, especially for family members who are learning ASL in a much later time period of their life. And they tend to apply ASL in English word order. But the point is to have two languages and for the children to have that ability to have two languages. Let's go back to ASL and English as separate entities and how we introduce this. We do not introduce both languages through SimCom. Instead, we emphasize on a language plan. And who's responsible for this language plan? It's a team approach. It's not just the parents, it's the team. Parents, school, teachers, administrators. And we set ground rules. This is a time period where we're on the playground, we're out for recess, it's lunchtime, and kids tend to sign, especially the deaf kids. They're going to use sign in those aspects. But in lunchtime, there should be exposure to signs with English captioning, There's texting, there's Facebook, social media, Twitter, all those things that are important aspects of our kids' lives now, and it's critical to not ignore them. It's critical to include them because it's an essential part of our written language, and to be able to find that relationship between ASL and the written language is important. One of my favorite stories that I've used as a model when working with teachers like myself, and we talk about language issues. So this story occurred during my research of school-age kids and the impact of vocabulary development. So we decided to set up a pre-test and a post-test for children who are watching clips of TV shows at 30-minute time levels, and its captioning is at a 5th, 6th, 7th grade reading level, and we give them the vocabulary. The pre-test has 10 words, and we're not going to write down the meaning, just see the words, know the vocabulary. And then we're going to watch the clip, and then the post-test has the exact same 10 words, and then they have to see if they grasp the words as well as the meaning. And it was amazing how the percentage of understanding of those vocabulary words increased after watching it. Afterwards, we'd have an interview with the students and have a discussion about what they watched and ask them what they thought of the story and if they noticed those words and if any of the vocabulary was challenging to them. And some said yes and some said no. But one student did raise their hand and said, "What does backstabbing mean?" I was really surprised by that. That was interesting because these are middle schoolers and I see them using that sign a lot. But that meant that they're not seeing the connection. So I wrote the word up on the wall, backstabbing, and some students seemed to already know. They knew the sign for that, and others didn't. So I decided to ask them what the meaning was, and they said, well, it's when you do something to another person. I said, okay, you've got the meaning, but now what is the sign for it? So I showed them the sign because they didn't know. And boy, were they surprised because they use that sign on a regular basis, but they didn't understand the English word or the vocabulary for that. So it's really important that they have the English connection to the sign. And that just kind of proves our point that we need to have access to both languages and to be able to connect the relationship and encourage them and guide them. And that's parents, teachers, friends, whatever environment they're in. Make it fun. Expose them to words. Play with the words. And so they can develop confidence with their vocabulary and work on ASL and English. They can't just do that on their own. They need the guidance and the support and the exposure and the instruction. Hearing children, they have to take a formal English class, and that's required of them in schools. But what about deaf children? Where's their formal ASL instruction? And it's really important in their academics. It's something to think about. And we need to talk more about that. And in our community, they need to have that exposure so that in the future, our children can be exposed to a myriad of things and see what that school looks like. Yes, do you have a question?
In the classroom, you teach 50% English and 50% ASL. How does that work?
Okay, how that works in the classroom is that we set up a language plan. And that language plan is structured in time. Unfortunately, many of our deaf students, when they first arrive to school, they have very limited access to ASL and English as well. Their family doesn't sign much. So when they arrive, we have to really help them catch up to their social ASL and really include them. And then move on to academic ASL, then to reading and to writing English. So that's 4 elements that they have to catch up on And that's a lot, especially as a kindergartner. So we focus on social ASL most of the time, and academic ASL is much smaller. And then as time goes on and they develop, that switches. And as they move along, the ratio changes, and the social ASL diminishes, and the formal ASL, academic ASL, expands. Does that mean that the social ASL goes away? No, they use it all the time. It's never something that is stopped. It's ongoing. And children know it, and they know what to use in the classroom. And they're exposed to all of idioms and words and classifiers. In fact, classifiers is something that they really enjoy. They love playing that classifier game. So we give them the A handshake, and we say, what signs match the A handshake? Girl, tomorrow, and they give me a variety of vocabulary words, and we put it on the board so they see the written English form and attach that to the ASL sign, and then we can expand from there. So it might be a not 50-50 split, but an 80-20 split, or a 60-40 split. And why that happens is because language instruction is in ASL, but at the same time you're writing English up on the board to make that connection, so it's always there. And they have exposure to books, and they have exposure to written language. And for those kids who really benefit from the spoken language, they have elocution. And elocution is important too, because that helps us, based on their needs, what they need. In fact, in Tucson, we set up a classroom just for that. We had a kindergarten classroom with spoken English and ASL. It was really interesting. Some teachers, though, were really upset because they thought, why are you supporting the spoken language? And parents just didn't fully understand because they didn't have enough knowledge to understand. And they wanted to make sure it wasn't just lip reading. We said, no, of course. We introduce it at all levels. We have spoken English, and they can go back and forth. And it's not 100% one way or the other. We always use ASL, but we need to be fair to the students who benefit from the spoken language as well. So we'll have stories and sign, and when we're finished that group, we'll go over and do the spoken part of the story, and they'll read the story, and then we'll go back to the middle and mix it all up. We'll sign to voice and back and forth. What's important is the language attitude. The kids understand and respect the two languages and develop that understanding of the language and the mutual respect at a young age. We don't want them to be saying English is better than ASL or ASL is better than English. We want them to have that positive attitude. We can't afford to have that kind of attitude in our community. So equal respect is critical. So that's why teachers play a very large role in the language attitude that's developed. And elocution and attitude are extremely important along with the language plan.
How many hearing students are involved in that program? Do you currently have any hearing students?
We have no hearing students in that program. However, at the Clare School in Tucson, years ago, I think it was more than 15 years ago, I believe, Dr. Sam Salepa and his team set up the school, and I had both deaf and hearing children together. My son was a student there for 2 years. Oh, it was amazing. What an amazing model. And language instruction was all 100% in ASL. And let me tell you, after the end of the year, you couldn't even tell which one was deaf and which child was hearing because they all looked the same. They were so incredibly fluent in ASL. You know, but sometimes kids in the classroom would get tired. The hearing kids, they get tired and they want to go back to their first language, English. And the staff would need to remind them that during the school day they needed to use their sign. And they were good about it and responded well. It was an ASL environment. At recess, they could do whatever they wanted to. and they could sign. And some kids you could tell with their finger spelling. They might have been sisters or brothers of deaf adults. They might have been CODA kids. Some were parents who really wanted their child to learn another language because they traveled a lot. And they wanted them to learn 2 or 3 different languages. It was very fascinating as to the makeup of the kids in this program. The school closed, though, unfortunately, because it was under a research grant. And they needed 50-50 deaf and hearing, and there were just not enough deaf children because the school for the deaf was also in the same town. And so therefore made it difficult to meet the needs of the grant, unfortunately, so it had to close. I'm hoping that in the future there will be another town that will be able to set up a program very similar.
In your opinion, what would be the ideal bilingual educational program for deaf children?
Ideal situation? The best that we could have, I would say a sign academy, where we have ASL and English, and we accept hearing students as well. And the hearing students must be fluent in sign. And they need to have those sign skills in order to protect them from losing focus on the content area of our academics. We want kids to have language as part of their everyday life. We want first graders, kindergartners, first graders to build that confidence in their language through socialization. Vygotsky, he had, and his co-workers had a wonderful plan, and they really developed language through socialization and helping the children become facilitators of their language. The Montessori approach was similar too. The Montessori approach helped kids own their academics and be able to learn at their own style. And the expectations is that they would become critical thinkers. And supporting that concept is not old. It's something that's come back into the educational system as well. The kids are not studying to pass a test. They're studying and learning to become great thinkers and great contributions to society. That's why I think it's important to have a sign academy, including hearing and deaf students, and to respect both languages. Now that would be ideal.
Do you have any advice for parents who just found out their child is deaf?
I think for someone who just found out their child was deaf, the best advice is to let them know that they don't need a cure. They have a normal child, and their child is not different. The only difference they may have is that they'll be learning a second language, and that is all. How you discipline and how you work with your child will be the same, and it's okay to feel that you should ask questions, seek advice. I encourage that. You need to embrace the language and allow your child to speak and learn sign language as well. Don't discount ASL. It's an important part of who your child is and for their life as well as yours. And I think both your lives will become more enriched due to the experience of learning ASL. It's a beautiful language.
I don't have a question, but I just want to sincerely thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. You're welcome.